Garmin Alpha LTE can solve your range problems. Even if your dog's not that far away from you, but you're losing radio signal on a regular basis, the Alpha LTE can fill in those gaps. There are going to be situations where I'm not going to know exactly where my dog is, and it's going to save me the time of having to go back to the truck to get the long-range antenna to determine if I need to go pick my dog up. And that's what I'm looking for with this particular system. All right, today we're going to take a look at the Garmin Alpha LTE tracking system. LTE is a standalone tracking system that works off of the LTE cellular network. You can track your dog as a standalone device using just your cell phone. But it is also designed to work with the Garmin Alpha ecosystem. Pretty much everything that you can track with the new Alpha system, so Alpha 10, 200, 300, any of the collars that you can track with that, the Alpha LTE will pair up with that. The Alpha LTE is primarily designed for folks that are already running the Alpha ecosystem of collars. It is designed to be used in what's called companion mode with the collars that you have. It's for folks that are running in areas where they're losing radio signal between their handheld and their collar. For folks that've got dogs that outrun the range of their system. You've got a dog that is working way past what your handheld can do in the field at 1 mile to 1.5 miles. I'm gonna lose the radio signal on my handheld, but with the Alpha LTE, I can get that range. It's also designed for folks that are hunting in terrain that is difficult for the radio signal. And if I'm on one side of a hill and my dog's on the other, there's a pretty good chance that I'm going to drop that radio signal. The cellular signal is going to get through that. Even if your dog's not that far away from you, but you're losing radio signal on a regular basis, the Alpha LTE can fill in those gaps. Garmin Alpha LTE can solve your range problems. The Alpha LTE is also a complete backup for your Garmin tracking collars. If you were to have a collar failure while your dog's out in the field, the Alpha LTE works as a standalone unit and would allow you to track your dog outside of using the standard Garmin radio frequency system. So in the grand scheme of things, this is not that expensive of a backup. The units are $300, and then a 1-year subscription is going to be $50. And that's per collar. It's just not that expensive as far as a backup for my dog's tracking system. The Alpha LTE system works on the cellular network. You've got to have a cell signal on both ends. Your dog has to be inside the network, and you have to be inside the network. You only need the slightest amount of signal. If you can send a text message, you'll be able to track on this. You need 4 things for an Alpha LTE system to work. You need the Alpha LTE collar, a subscription for the Alpha LTE collar, smartphone that can download the Alpha app, and then you need to be on the 4G LTE network. Let's talk about how the Alpha LTE system works. There are 2 different ways to run the Alpha LTE. You can either run it in standalone mode where you're just using the Alpha LTE collar to track, or you can run it in what's called companion mode, where it is linked to your actual Garmin GPS tracking collar. Alpha LTE standalone mode is going to just be the Alpha LTE collar, and it's going to be your smartphone. I've got the Alpha app loaded onto my smartphone. Sync the 2 of them up together, and then you'll be tracking using the map feature on your smartphone. So you've got to be somewhere where you've got cell phone signal. Doesn't require a lot of cell phone signal, but both the collar and the phone have to be in network for it to work. One of the downsides of standalone mode in this product is battery life. Because in standalone mode, it's relying on the LTE network all the time, you're going to have a shorter battery life than you will in companion mode. Depending on the update rate that you're using, your battery life is going to range between about 11 hours of runtime up to about 45 with the longest update rate. All right, let's talk about the Alpha LTE in companion mode. The LTE collar is paired to my tracking collar. The Alpha handheld is paired to the smartphone app. When I have VHF radio signal between the collar and the handheld, I'm not using the LTE network. Once I lose radio signal between the collar and the handheld, then the handheld is going to tell my phone that I need the LTE signal. The phone then tells the LTE unit that we need to start tracking on the LTE network. Pulls information off the collar, it sends information to the phone, and then the phone sends information to my handheld. And so I'm actually able to see my dog on the handheld. The beauty of it is that you can keep your cell phone in your pocket. They're Bluetooth together, so the information that's coming off of your phone is going onto your Alpha handheld. Now, you need your cell phone and you need the app open for it to work, but you're not having to use the cell phone when you're tracking your dog. All of the tracking is done from your Alpha handheld. All right, companion mode battery life, because you're not having to use the LTE network the entire time you're running, the battery life is going to be longer in companion mode. In companion mode, you can get up to about 75 hours of runtime in companion mode. This is my favorite part. It's really cool. What I like about it is, let me go back. So I'm in compass mode, and when you select on it, you have your regular, and then you have your Alpha LTE. And so when you're in companion mode, you can see, signal on both. And it tracks, when you're in LTE mode, it tracks the same. All right, Garmin Alpha LTE, a few things to remember. This is a new product. We are expecting some changes in software. It doesn't work with a 550 Plus in a companion mode. It doesn't work with the watches. I'm expecting to see that change over time. Remember that you've got to have a smartphone, you've got to have a charge on that phone, and it has to have the app open. The Alpha LTE requires an annual subscription for each collar. The Garmin Alpha LTE is tracking only. It does not have any sort of stem, vibe, or tone options at this time. Another thing that you cannot do with the Alpha LTE is change settings on your collar through the LTE network. You do have the ability, there are running lights that are on the Alpha LTE, and you can change that through the network. So if you're in a low light situation and you want to turn the tracking running lights on, you can do that. Right now in companion mode, I recommend that you pair it and put it on the same collar strap. That just makes life a little bit easier, but we do offer it with a collar strap if you need it that way. So when you place your order, there's a drop-down menu. You can just select a collar strap if you need one. All right, so this is Garmin's first foray into tracking systems using LTE cellular technology. I'm pretty pleased with it overall, but it is very specific for certain customers. There's a lot of places that I hunt that I don't have a cell phone signal, and so it's just not going to work for me in those situations. So you've really kind of got to know where you're going to be running your dog. Places where you do have a signal and it does not require an enormous amount of signal. If you've got just, if your phone is showing a network, it's going to work. If your phone's dropped into SOS mode or you're showing just nothing, it's not going to work in those areas. So you need to make that decision prior to buying this product as to whether or not it's going to work in the situations for you. But overall, I've been incredibly pleased with what I have seen from this right off the bat. In North Dakota last week, and I was way out in the boonies, and I was able to track the entire time. A lot of places that you wouldn't think that you would have a signal, you have enough signal for this to work. So it's a neat device. As a standalone, I'm not as happy with it, but in companion mode, I've been really pleased with how it works, and I'll be running it next year. But overall, it's a pretty neat system, and I'm expecting some changes on it in the near future. All right, so I will be running, this is the setup that I will be running on my dogs this year. It's basically going to be a 25, this is actually a regular battery, but it'll be a 25 with an Alpha LTE on the strap. As a general rule, I hunt off foot, and my dogs, while they're big running dogs, for bird dogs, they're not gigantic running dogs. But I have a few that have an all-age background, and they have a tendency to occasionally play that game. If I lose range on a dog, what happens after that just depends on some things. As a general rule, it's going to come down to what's the weather and where am I hunting. But if I don't pick a signal up relatively soon, I'm typically going to go back to my truck, get a long-range antenna. Usually, when I hook up the long-range antenna, I'll immediately get a signal. I'll figure out where the dog is. I'll drive to pick him up, and then I'll start hunting again. Going forward, I may not have to do that as much, because being able to tap into the LTE network, even if my dog gets out of regular radio frequency range, the LTE is going to pick up, and now I'm going to know where that dog is. In the past, if I didn't have a signal, the debate was, okay, do I keep moving forward to find my dog, or do I go back to my truck? Because as I'm pushing to that dog, he's pushing away, and we're both getting further away from the truck. And so, in a situation where I don't know exactly where he is, if the weather's hot, or if we're hunting somewhere that he has the opportunity to get to a road, I'm going to want to pick him up as soon as possible. So I'm going to go back to my truck, and I'm going to go from there. You just can't carry a big enough antenna on your person to track at long distances. And so those are situations where I would go back to the truck, to hunt, to pick up a dog that's lost. Now, by having the Alpha LTE on here, I'm going to be able to track that dog at a longer range, and I'll have a better idea of, okay, yeah, he's stretched out this way, but I can turn him, or if I go this way, I can cut him off. And so I'll just know a lot more. And at that point, I'll be able to make a more informed decision as to whether or not, when I've got a dog that's stretched out on me, if I really need to go to the truck, or if I can pick him up in the direction that I want to hunt. And so it's going to change the way that I do some stuff. So I'm excited to see how that works out for me. So the advantage that the Alpha LTE system is going to give me is that there are going to be situations where I'm not going to know exactly where my dog is, and it's going to save me the time of having to go back to the truck to get the long range antenna to determine if I need to go pick my dog up. And that's what I'm looking for with this particular system. Now, the other thing that's a deal for me is that this will give me a backup system on my dog. I have been very fortunate in the last, we've been running Garmin collars for 15 years. I think I've had 1 or 2 collar failures in that time period as far as where something went wrong with a collar on a dog in the field. And that's pretty good, especially because I run a lot of prototype stuff and I'm sometimes testing software, and so sometimes I'm running stuff that's a little on the sketchy side. And so, having this as a backup is something that's just going to make me feel a little bit more comfortable. As a general rule, I don't need a backup to find my dogs. As a general rule, I'm able to track my dogs and I don't lose signal. And so it's one of those things that, 9 times out of 10, it's not something that I'm going to need. But every once in a while, I have a couple of dogs. I've got young dogs. I've got 3 young dogs right now that are all wanting to run, and they're running straight lines and they're just leaving the country. And then I've got a couple of older dogs that every once in a while they'll stretch out on me. Cowboy still occasionally likes to leave the country. And so, so having this as an option is just going to let me know what's going on, but having it as a backup, it's just going to make me feel better about being able to find my dogs if something were to go wrong.